In space, no one can hear you scream. But if you're sat in your keks playing Alien Isolation, I'm pretty sure the neighbours will hear you squealing like a 2-year-old. Taking its cues from Ridley Scott's 1979 masterpiece of sci-fi horror, the game casts you as Amanda Ripley. Sounds familiar? That's because she's the daughter of Ellen Ripley. There are elements of Outlast and Amnesia in there, but what makes it stand out is the extraordinary attention to detail, from the painstakingly detailed environments to the terrifyingly realised, almost sentient xenomorph. Video game gods, I know you're listening. Please don't let this be rubbish. Please. Zombies. Open world. Apocalypse. As Morrissey so eruditely warbled, stop me, oh stop me if you think that you've heard this one before. And it's true. As you parker your way around rooftops during the day, gathering items and rigging traps, Dying Light does look a little bit Mirror's Edge meets Dead Island. But wait, because things become way more sinister, dangerous and interesting when the sun goes down. That's because during the hours of darkness, the zombies become more vicious. And see that rooftop you're smugly hiding out on? That's now as much use as a nut cutlet at an undead barbecue, since the zombies can now climb. The emphasis is on surviving to see the sun rise one more time. Bad news. There's been a terrible plane crash. Good news! You survived a terrible plane crash, and your new home is an idyllic island. Bad news. The island is inhabited by a horde of ravenous cannibals. Good news! Oh, wait, there is no more good news. Except that the forest looks genuinely brilliant. You're free to explore its dense forest, chop down trees, craft items, build shelter, and scavenge food. You can hide behind doors you've made, or man up and take the fight to the indigenous threat. Taking inspiration from the likes of The Descent and Cannibal Holocaust, I fully expect the forest to force the player into some rather unsavoury situations and then ask them to justify their callous actions. After all, you are the intruder here. The hills may have eyes, but so does that tree, and maybe that rock, and oh, for the love of God, do I have to go into that cave? In the 1980s, the future looked very much like this. Routine, a first-person game set in an abandoned moon base. The premise is simple. Survive long enough to learn what happened to everybody stationed here. Where have they gone? Probably to a wine bar. That's where everybody went in the 80s. Anyway, what makes Routine even more interesting is that there are no health packs and no second chances. A perma-death system means that if you encounter what actually lurks aboard the Lunar Research Station, you'll probably have to start right back at the beginning. The Evil Within has a name redolent of a particularly vengeful curry, but actually it represents something very special. It marks the return of Shinji Mikami to a genre he helped to define through his work on the Resident Evil series. We're talking about the man who directed Resident Evil 4 here. It's true that in recent years his work has strayed from the genre, but he's continued to produce stuff that is both memorable and often eccentric. But The Evil Within definitely feels like a homecoming. So far, the imagery has been disturbing, yet there's also a suggestion of psychological horror intertwining with the more gruesome stuff. Has the master still got it? We hope so, and should it prove a success, you can expect to see the start of a new era in the survival horror genre. Norway, famed for its fjords, the northern lights, and death metalers burning down churches and murdering each other. Soon, it'll also be famous for Among the Sleep, a fascinating independent horror adventure being developed by Norway's Krillbite studio. You play as a 2-year-old child, exploring their house at night. But reality soon begins to falter. lapsing into dream and weird fantasy, the child's drowsy, diminutive viewpoint warping the world around you in creative and unsettling ways. Like quite a few games here, Daylight realises that vulnerability is the key to stoking fear. You're equipped with no weapons or items apart from a mobile phone. It's your only tool and your only source of light. Just pray to your God that it's got a better battery life than the iPhone 5. Set in that well-worn trope of an abandoned hospital, Daylight has procedurally generated levels, meaning that playthroughs are always distinct. It's being pitched as a psychological thriller and sees you wake up in an abandoned hospital without any recollection of who you are or why you're there. A bit like that time after your work's Christmas party. You need to find a way out of this unique labyrinth, and I suspect that might well involve wading through some of its unpleasant mysteries. Rumours of a private healthcare version with much shorter loading times are, however, unfounded. Pale-faced girls with long black hair. Themes of revenge and rebirth. It sounds a bit like the One Direction Twitter feed, but Dreadout is even scarier than that. A class of high school students gets stranded while on a trip, but the town is deserted, and the main character, Linda, must embrace this darkness if her and the rest of her class are to make it out alive. Dreadout looks ready to play with a whole range of Asian horror tropes, but it also reminds us of the classic Fatal Frame series, but with a more modern approach. The analog camera has been ditched in favour of a smartphone. Expect scares, but hopefully a good dose of puzzle solving. And no Harry Styles. Asylum is a psychological horror set in the Hanwell Mental Institute, a home for the clinically insane. Yes, this sounds like familiar territory, but the Kickstarter-funded asylum site's H.P. Lovecraft is one of its main influences, so expect there to be more slithering away beneath the surface, with the horror coming from the building of atmosphere and more story-based revelations. If you're looking for something that doesn't involve pointing torches from a first-person perspective, Fran Bow is definitely worth your attention. It's a weird, disturbing point-and-click adventure which reached its Kickstarter goal last August. You play as Fran, a young girl struggling with a mental illness and an unfair destiny. After witnessing the horrific loss of her parents, she withdraws into the woods with her only friend, a black cat named Mr. Midnight. Finding herself locked away in an asylum from which she must escape, Fran has to self-administer medication to help her solve puzzles and escape the asylum. It's dark, disturbing stuff, but it's all wrapped up in a weirdly beautiful 2D art style. Neverending Nightmares is a really personal horror game that was inspired by the developer's own struggles with depression and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Players awake in a darkened mansion which must be explored to piece together a broken narrative. You have to sift through the darkness, sorting out what is real and can be trusted from what is a nightmarish fabrication. Neverending Nightmares has a wonderfully distinct pen and ink style, with cross-hatching creating atmospheric shadows. Colour is sparingly used to highlight key objects, and, inevitably, blood. Pioneered by the likes of Lovecraft and M.R. James, weird fiction is a horror subgenre that you don't see explored too frequently outside of the written page. The Vanishing of Ethan Carter is directly inspired by those wonderfully macabre tales, but it's also a police procedural of sorts, casting you in the role of a detective who must solve the eponymous disappearance using a mixture of traditional police methods and a unique supernatural ability to see what happened at crime scenes. We've only glimpsed the world through screenshots and a couple of GIFs, but it looks beautiful and forbidding. You may have already played Outlast on PC or are looking forward to it shortly coming to PlayStation 4, but more content is coming which seeks to fill in some of the narrative gaps in the history of Mount Massive Asylum. You play as the whistleblower, whose tip brought the original protagonist Miles Upshur to the asylum in the first place. You'll witness the experiments and abuse that led to the downfall. If you survive the initial outbreak, new areas will open up with terrifying new secrets. For more on the most horrific games around, stay with IGN.